Alrighty. Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably have a couple more people join us as we get through the introduction. But once more, good evening, everyone. My name is Connor Humphrey. I am the museum curator here at the John James Audubon Museum at John James Audubon State Park in Henderson, Kentucky. If you are interested in visiting the museum, we are currently operating under our winter hours. So we're open Wednesday through Sunday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can always check our social media pages for updates on hours and announcements for programs kind of like tonight's event. We are excited tonight to have Dr. Roberta J. M. Olson presenting Audubon Redrawn. Before we do get into the presentation, I first want to thank the Friends of Audubon for sponsoring this event and helping to make it happen. If you guys at home, our attendees today, are interested in learning more about how the Friends of Audubon support the park and the museum, if you're interested in becoming a member, or if you're interested in making a donation in support of tonight's event, please visit www.friendsofaudubon.org. Next, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. In a moment, I will turn things over to Dr. Olson, and if you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, please submit them via the Q&A dialog box, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as time allows after the presentation. If we have questions that overlap in content, I will do my best to combine those questions so they can be answered at the same time and give us more time for other questions. Lastly, I want to introduce our speaker for tonight. So Dr. Roberta J. M. Olson received her Ph.D. in art history from Princeton University, Curator of Drawings Emerita at the New York Historical, and Professor Emerita of Art History at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. Her interdisciplinary research concerns drawings, Italian Renaissance art, and representations of birds and astronomical phenomena. Keen on exploring the intersection of art and science, her theory that the Star of Bethlehem, painted by Giotto in Scrovegni Chapel, is a portrait of Halley's Comet in 1301, which, by the way, was published in Scientific American, sparked the European Space Agency to christen their satellite to that comet, Giotto. In addition to curating exhibitions at the New York Historical, she has guest-curated exhibitions with catalogs at the National Gallery of Art and the Walters Art Museum, as well as in Europe. An award-winning author, Olson's books include Fire and Ice, A History of Comets and Art, Italian Renaissance Sculpture, Fire in the Sky, Comets and Meteors, The Decisive Centuries in British Art and Science, The Florentine Tondo, and Drawn by New York, 6 Centuries of Watercolors and Drawings at the New York Historical Society. Among the most recent are Audubon as Artist, A New Look at the Birds of America, which of course we'll also be talking about tonight. Audubon's Aviary, the original watercolors for the Birds of America. Making It Modern, the folk art collection of Ellie and Viola Nadelman. Cosmos, the Art and Science of the Universe. And Artist in Exile, the visual diary of Baroness Hyde de Neuville. She is collaborating with the publisher Taschen on a double-elephant-folio-size book of all the Audubon-Havell plates entitled John James Audubon and the Birds of America. Dr. Olson, I will now hand things over to you, and once more I want to thank you for presenting for us tonight.
Well, thank you, Connor. I'm delighted to be here with you and all your friends and to be with people in Henderson. And now you all know too much about me, but thank you for that lovely introduction. And tonight I hope we will discover some of the secrets behind Audubon's absolutely magical images of birds and shed light on some of the misinformation about the man that has come to see us recently. We will explore what I call my roots at the New York Historical for the past 25 years, where I had all 435 watercolor models for the Birds of America plates. I like to say, and we'll use the watercolors as sort of the basis of the inspiration. They came to the New York Historical Society. It was called then in 1863 and came directly from C. Bakewell Audubon. And by that purchase, they were saved from migrating, flying over to the British Museum. But before swooping into this discussion, I would like to know QA, tell me how many of them are birders. And also, do some of you have Audubon prints of birds or of butterflies? I'll share with you the first time when I saw Audubon's watercolors without glass, I literally was speechless because they're dazzling and unforgettable. And I really wish tonight I could show them to you so that you could have the same kind of experience. But we'll try to recreate some of that. Working with them over the 25 years, I staged 9 exhibitions at least. And during all that time, I had lots of questions from people, but the one question that always came to the fore was Audubon more an artist or a naturalist? People love to debate that. So let's debate in the Q&A. So be prepared. Now, I want, in order for you to appreciate Audubon, to know that he did not have Merlin. His only visuals were prints and books. And he did something that we probably do every day, but we use a device. He created videos in his mind. And let me take you through this, how he did it. In the vast literature about the artist and naturalist, was America's first great watercolorist and gifted nature writer, his art really had been ignored. He was always overshadowed by his dramatic life and his contributions to natural history, although he stated in his writings that naturalists should know works of art, just like Raphael should know anatomy and science. My recent book was Audubon as Artist. It was meant to sort of fill that vacuum, explore the character of Anita. That is Audubon's relationship with other artists and relying as much as possible, of course, on his extensive correspondence and publications. This sleuthing allowed me to reconstruct his self-education and to address some of the recent charges leveled against him. Unlike most people, Audubon did not find his vocation until he was over 40 years old. Can you imagine? And like Leonardo da Vinci, who likewise married art and science and was illegitimate, Audubon was a brilliant innovator and a creative entrepreneur, albeit a charismatic but difficult personality, changed the way we view birds. But Audubon was more than an illustrator of birds and more than an artist who depicted the natural world, because his works conveyed the rapturous wonder he experienced observing avian and embed us with one belly down in the swamps or up in trees with a you are there quality. So let's start considering the status of American ornithology when Audubon came to the U.S. in 1803. This was before the Louisiana Purchase, when Kentucky meant West America. Catesby left with the first, Alexander Wilson, the second person to study American birds. And their illustrations are close to traditional profile poses in all ornithological tradition, derived from specimens, skins, or illustrations of others. Note that Catesby at the top was equally interested in botany. Wilson finds species plates. You can see all the multiple species there, where Audubon, on the right, said, no, I do only one species. Each one deserved a plate, and I want to do the entire biography of the bird on each plate. One of Audubon's greatest achievements was representing for the first time in history all of his birds life-size, and he used a technological innovation for that. In paper, which is 40 inches tall, which meant that you could, at the next event, over in their life-size measurement. Also, one of his hallmarks, and here you're going to have to look very closely at your screen, pupils in each of his bodies, sliver, a pie slice of text. That is actually the conserved paper. It stimulates the reflection of light and makes all his birds pure. They are engaging us. They're having a conversation, a confrontation with us. Like all of us, Audubon was full of contrast, sensitive, impressive, reactionary, artistic. So before we begin our walk on the wild side in Saint-Domingue, where he was born, the island of Haiti, to a former French naval sea captain and one of his mistresses, Jean Robin. Therefore, He was a bastard, okay? A natural child. And this fact haunted him all his life. He woke up nights in fever sweats because he was afraid that he was discovered. We don't feel that way today, but in his day and age, it was terrible. It meant that he couldn't inherit from his father, even though he was the only son. But perhaps it was the driving force of his ambition. It made him a success, made him want to achieve something. And in fact, we'll see that he made lemonade out of lemons. Some of you might know that recently his genealogy has been questioned, but I answered those questions by researching documents in the French archives, and that was one of the silver linings of COVID. They dumped all their archival documents online, so I was able to find them. And I also discovered in France, in a letter held by his descendants, that proved incontrovertibly the identity of his father, Jean Ben, who died when he was 30 years old. So he was always an outsider, always felt like an outcast. In 1788, when he was 3, his father sent him to France under the pseudonym of Maisonneuve, from his new house. This was to hide his illegitimacy, but it was also symbolic of a new life. It was only the first of 10 names and they used the documents. Audubon's early life, like that of his father Jean, was turbulent. He played back 3 revolutions. The first was the Wheaton Revolution, a revolt by enslaved people against French colonial rule, which ended in 1840 with the colony's independence. The second was the French Revolution, which in Nantes, Audubon lived from the beginning of 3, and there you see their outside. In fact, they didn't just guillotine people. They tied them to barges by the hundreds and sank the barges in the Loire River. And in fact, we know that Audubon saw his aunt dragged to the streets to her destiny. As a youth, Audubon was a truant dreamer. His life away. He wandered away from school to the countryside, initiating his incredible passion for nature. And he began drawing people of feathered tribes, writing. One, but the aerial compositions, they're pointed out for the influence, the beauty and softness of their image. He roamed his novels on the screen by Audubon that is home to thousands of birds, 2 species on 8 hectares. I highly recommend see these stories. It's a great bird in paradise. In 1796, his father said, aha, this is too much. He sent him to the Naval Academy at La Rochelle so that, like his father and his grandfather, he could have a marriage career. But it turned out terrible seasickness. He with his maritime career, although it was probably where he learned draftsmanship. So he was taken off of the ship and he was put into something called the Atelier de la Garniture, which was where they designed the interiors of ships and its fitting. After 2 years, he was homeschooled, music, photography, drawing, the classics. He hated math. In 2011, I felt to ask, docents are very important. Are there any Audubon bird drawings before he came to America? None were published, no one knew anyone, but after a search, I found this pastel on the left, dated 1803 on the lower right, and La Geretière, which is the name of the country house, and it's still with Audubon's descendants. It's a European goldfinch, and it's in a strict profile ornithological pose, but you can see he used Buffon. He talks about, says the nomenclature is from Buffon, and on the right is Buffon, and that was probably from the book of illustrations owned by his father. But notice how he doesn't just copy the image. He also doesn't use watercolor because the colored versions of the Buffon are in watercolor. Audubon said, no, not watercolor. It's too flat. He wanted to get the texture of feathers, so he used pastel. And you can see that in his bird. He also wetted the pastel around the neck. And this is the beginning of what he would do with all his birds. It's synesthesia. You want to touch it. You want to hear it. And this is what we see he develops. In 1803, his father sent the unmotivated teenager to America, and this was the third revolution, the American Revolution. And I hope you're watching Ken Berger's series. In the French Revolution, Captain Audubon, his father, fought on the American side against the British, including fighting at the Battle of Yorktown, and he actually was imprisoned in New York City for a year. Young Audubon was sent to America ostensibly to oversee Mill Grove, which you see here, property outside of Philadelphia in what is today Audubon, Pennsylvania, which he purchased in 1789. His father believed that America was the land of promise. And at Mill Grove, he basically went out and studied and fell in love with the wildlife of America. By the way, I recommend you visit Mill Grove as well. It's a wonderful place. And it was there he met Lucy Bakewell from the adjacent estate. And it was love at first sight. He was highly romantic. She was very pragmatic, and we know that opposites attract like a magnet. And it was a true love match. He never betrayed her, although he was a notorious flirt, loved very intelligent women. In America, Audubon continued working with friable pastels, writing in his essay, My Style, humorously. In America, I betook myself to the drawing of specimen, hung by a string by 1 foot with the desire to show their every portion. In this manner, I made some pretty fair signboards for poulterers. He has a sense of humor, and many times his birds have that same sense of humor. But these are very poignant works because the birds are clearly dead as doornails. But Audubon put them on a string and wished to reanimate them and studied them as they turned around. And you also notice in the barn owl on the right, it's in a 36-inch piece of paper, and it is life size. The visual inspiration for this unique method was hunting trophy paintings. And here's an example by Jean-Baptiste Audry, who would be one of the influences throughout his career. He's a animalier painter. And yes, unfortunately, Europeans eat songbirds. They still do, unfortunately, but it's being frowned upon and it's being clamped down on. In March 1805, Audubon returned to France to ask his father permission to marry Lucy, taking his hung-by-the-string pastels to show the family physician and friend, Dr. d'Orbigny. He was an amateur naturalist who helped Audubon become more scientific by drawing specimens and by going out in the field and drawing live birds and then comparing them with illustrations. On the left, we see one of these. You can see that it's been cropped, and you also see, if you look really close at it, he's outlined the vegetation, but he only fills in the bird's contours in pastel. He then made a second set to take back to America, and you see that on the right. This one's in Harvard, most of them are. And you can see what he's done is he's filled in the botanicals, and in fact, the berry, the blackberry, must have been States because it is a North American specimen. While studying with d'Orbigny, he started to add settings, like you see on the left, and portray both sexes, like you see in the state bird of Kentucky. I hope you know that. And this was sparking his eventual goal to show the full life story of each species. And here you see he differentiates them. He has the female with her crest down and the male with his crest up. And on the right, notice with the hoopoe, I hope you know this bird, it's a wonderful bird. There is a butterfly down below. He introduces other creatures, and look at the tip of its beak. He's got a tiny insect there. And if you know about the hoopoe, you know that it usually has its crest down. Here it's fanned up, and you know the next minute it's going to go whop down. So he has movement already in his birds. In May of 1846, Audubon returned to America, where on July 3rd, not 4th, 1812, he was granted citizenship in San Domingue. That's his birthplace, although his father claimed as early as a passport, which lists his birthplace as Louisiana. Is illegitimate. People have accused Audubon of fabricating the fact he was born in Louisiana, but in fact, it was his father. However, a word of caution about Audubon, as one scholar has claimed, he had the faultiest memory. He had no memory for dates or specifics, but he had a great visual memory, and especially for birds. And he capitalized on that in his entire life. On his return in 1806, he visited Peale's museum. You see a view, it no longer exists. On the left, Charles Wilson is opening the curtain for us, which combined art and science. Note that the displays in the long room contained taxidermied specimens, not as in Europe with blank backgrounds, but rather with painted settings and in frames, and they were painted by Peale's daughter, Sophonisba Anguissola, who was the first American female ornithologist. Nearby are portraits of people, so you'll notice the mastodon bones. You see the turkey specimen on the left. Those were famous attractions at Peale's museum. Now remember this green arrow up there, because we're going to come back to it. With this group, let's see how quickly Audubon developed and introduced watercolor to what will become his multimedia productions that defy the senses. Starting with Buffon's pair on the upper left, we don't know why they're perching on the tree. There's no gravity. They don't really sit there. Below them on the lower left is Audubon's Eurasian nuthatch that he did in La Rochelle. And notice that the bird is standing on the tree. There's gravity. And the bird has a mind because, look, he's looking at ants crawling up the tree. In 1813, he does the watercolor in the center. And you notice there's more watercolor because it's not just pastel. And you can see the watercolor definitely in that inchworm. And you can see that the birds are not looking at ants. They're looking at the inchworm. And there are two. And we wonder which of those birds is going to get the inchworm. And the inchworm is in this translucent watercolor, just like you would see it in nature. And again, notice like the Hoopoe's crest, it's moving. We expect it to jump up the tree. And then we move to the far right. This is the watercolor model for birds of Roberta. It combines all his observations in this model, where the birds are sentient beings. They're in the state of becoming, like in Baroque art, as though if we blinked, they would fly off the page. And this is Audubon's secret sauce. Okay? No other avian artist, even to this day, has ever equaled it. In 1808, he marries Lucy, and having become a businessman, they travel to Kentucky to establish a store in the frontier of Louisville. 2 years later, while leading a double life flying birds, Alexander Wilson, also self-taught, a poet, a Scot, father of American ornithology, walks into his store. And this is a seminal moment, which we could talk about for hours. But the long story short is contrary to what detractors have said. Wilson noted, and passages preserved in his lost diary, that the two met several times when Audubon showed him drawings of two new birds, although Wilson considered Audubon a merchant and not an ornithologist, which Audubon was insulted about. Also, the visual evidence before you contradicts what detractors have claimed, that Audubon copied Wilson's red-winged blackbird. Rather, Wilson must have seen Audubon's flat pastel on the left. Notice that both birds, Wilson's is in the center, have extended tongues. Next, with Wilson, he improved on the red and the yellow feathers, also in the individual feathers, and he added a female down below at the left, but he's got two other species in there. When Audubon in 1822 executed the three top birds that you see on the right, he corrected Wilson's male. He, by the way, took out the tongue, there's no tongue, and he added electric blue, differentiated feathers, and the bird is much more rounded, and the individual feathers are shown. He also has a young male, a female, and then when he gets to England, he's got this wonderful setting by George Mason, pupil. He says, well, I need something more. His credo is drawn from nature. He has no specimens. He can't go out and find one. So he goes to Wilson. And he takes the female, okay, from Wilson, which looks just like a juvenile, and puts it in the lower right corner. What he does then in the ornithological biography, which is his text, Birds of America, is he cites Wilson's plate as well as his taxonomy. So in essence, yeah.
Can I jump in for just a second?
Sure.
So I did just get an email from someone that said, as you're moving around, the audio is cutting in and out a little bit, and I had someone else.
I won't move. Thank you.
Sorry, right. I just thought I'd jump in there real quick.
Thank you. So I will be very, very quiet and composed here. So in other words, what we have is Audubon's watercolor embodies a complex homage and competition with Wilson, in which Audubon really takes the prize, and his vignette shows the life cycle of the red-winged blackbird. So much out of the species intruding. In the summer of 1810, Audubon's moved to Henderson. He takes a short trip to St. Genevieve with his partner, Rosier, who decides to stay there and becomes extremely wealthy. And this is a very important seminal time for Audubon and Lucy. They become very prosperous. They build a log cabin, and that's not their log cabin on the left, but I just showed you it was probably a fairly modest house. And they befriend the Rankins, Dr. Rankin and his wife, who lived in the more, shall we say, expansive house on the right. And Rankin was to play a very important role in the early Audubon's lives. And we know that when he went back to Philadelphia in 1812, Lucy, who was pregnant, stayed there, and she actually gave birth to John Woodhouse in that very house. And it was there where she began her career as a governess, a career that would help finance the Birds of America and keep the Audubon family in, shall we say, the black and red. She talked about the children. Audubon wasn't just, however, content with the star. He was always growing birds, and he was a bit of an entrepreneur, and he went off and made some rather strange investments. He also partnered with Lucy's brother, Tom, on this Audubon and Blakewell sawmill and gristmill in Henderson, which, because of the British blockade in 1812, some problems economically from that, and also a terrible famine and drought. And then, of course, the Panic of 1818, he lost everything, declared bankruptcy, and the Audubons moved to Louisville, where he was arrested. It was during this time that we started. America was filled with purchase. There were photographs, and he began doing bread and butter portraits for 20 years. He started out doing profile portraits, the easiest. Graduated to three-dimensional, where you see more psychology and you see more modeling. And this gave him something that he applied to all his birds. You see this in his two oil palettes. What else? Two sons, Gifford and John Woodhouse. He realized that humans have two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. However, none of them are the same, that each one is individual, and that is the same with birds. If you look at the plumage of birds, none of them have the same identical plumage. And if you look at these two, you can see that he probably painted John Woodhouse first because it is less defined, less ambitious. And if you look at Victor Gifford, it has more of a setting texture. And if you look at the mouths, Victor Gifford's mouth actually sits in his face, where John Woodhouse's is on the surface. So he was always learning, and he applied what he learned in his portraits to birds. Portraits weren't enough to sustain them, so he needed to reinvent himself, and desperately seeking a living in art. In 1820, he and his family moved to Cincinnati, which was a rich intellectual and scientific center, and he redirected his career. He worked stuffing animals and birds and painting diorama backdrops in the Western Museum, and he also taught drawing. And it discovered that he used fine art prints of classical sculptures as models. A document exists, whereas before it was only speculation, which is extremely exciting. This is a smoking gun. Although the founder of the museum, Dr. Drake, gave Audubon the first exhibition of bird watercolors, which received high praise in the press, by the way, he could not pay his salary. However, in the address that Drake gave for the exhibition, the public talk, he said that Audubon should complete Wilson's documentation of birds and go down the Mississippi Flyway, because Wilson had died in 1815. Therefore, after less than a year, Audubon kissed his family goodbye, and with Joseph Mason, one of his pupils, boarded a flatboat, and you can see the green arrow, what a flatboat looked like, and then went on a 3-month birding expedition to the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. And this was another very important time. As always, he took books, Turton's translation of Linnaeus' Taxonomy, and Lockington's Fables, which He also began his Mississippi River Journal, 3 surviving journals, about 50 or so. Audubon intended this journal as a travelogue to share with his family, in which he reports the weather, landscapes, and birds, and among them, the bald eagle, which he divided into 2 species, because everything, remember, in American ornithology was just in its infancy. He divided into white-headed and brown-headed. He named the brown-headed eagle, later identified as a juvenile and not a separate species, as the bird of Washington. The species was still in flux in the 1830s and 40s, but you'll have to read my book to understand that the controversy continues to this day. Now remember Peale's specimen up by Wilson, mounted by Peale, and you see it on the lower right? See how different Audubon's watercolor is from Wilson's, copied from Peale's specimen, and you see the specimen as it is today in Harvard. Whereas Audubon knew both, but invented his own. Notice how the tail is different? And instead of a fish, he has a goose, feather on feather, under his talon. When he comes to engrave this, he decides he's going to do a whole new version and does it with watercolor on the right. This is 1828 in England, and notice what he does. He puts a fish under it. He also does more watercolor so you can see the individual feathers, and he says, and he tells us that he had a watercolor that he did on the Mississippi of a fish, and he used that for the fish under the talon. Audubon's time in New Orleans was among the most rewarding to reconstruct because people have totally ignored it. It's like his time in Paris. They just don't cover it. And he was excited about the Princeton city, which was a hothouse, multilingual environment in which he jump-started his career as an artist. He realized that the city had more to teach him about art than natural history, and so he sought out its art community, supporting himself through portraiture, copying works of art, teaching music, dancing, and art. Among the artists he knew and copied was John Vanderlyn, who was exhibiting paintings, including the scandalous Ariadne that you see on the screen. The first large-scale nude is in the U.S., where images of women for bar rooms. Eventually, after he bought it for $600, no one else wanted it. He was commissioned, however, to copy a print of Ariadne's head. Have that as lost. But I believe Vanderlyn's painting Audubon's famous design there incognito. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. Always in need of money, he was approached by a mysterious veiled woman, a self-styled artist. He called her beautiful Hamel, and she asked him to draw her likeness in the nude. So each day she corrected his drawing at the end of the session, and when it was finished, she inscribed both their names on it, and she gave him a kiss and a very expensive rifle. He mentions her in his journal as a Mrs. Andre, but in a 23-page letter to his wife, to Lucy, with a narrative, he describes the titillating 10 encounters with the fair incognito and reveals himself as a very gifted raconteur. I recommend that for reading. This commission may have been intended as an erotic present for the sitter's lover, like the drawing by Pinelli on the lower right screen. And if you look around her neck, she has a heart on her necklace. And this was a common practice in Europe at the time. How many of you have ever seen Redrawn? It's extraordinary. Audubon was blown away by the exotic birds in New Orleans. He observed great blues, and he and Mason also combed the markets for specimens to study, such as the specimen for this particular watercolor. He also would dissect many specimens of each species so that he could take measurements. He could also explain everything about how their innards work, what they ate, their diet, because that was the goal for the ornithological photography. Note that he had depicted the waiter in a feeding position because if the bird stood up, it would be too tall for the 40-inch paper. And also he has the wings so balancing because if they extended, it would extend 5.5 feet. Notice that there were pentimenti, see the green arrow. He didn't like that feather, so he covered it over with paper. But in the meantime, it has come through, but he changed his mind. And then he has this wonderful ability to suggest feathers. If you look at the lower right, he's taken a dry brush with the watercolor and the black ink and just smudged it across the paper. And to make the bird appear as though it's walking to the water, he covered up, in 1834, before engraving, he covered up the back foot with oil paint. In need of money and wanting to draw birds in the wild, Audubon accepted a tutoring position at the Prairie Plantation, Oakley, where he and Mason roamed the countryside rich in wildlife from June through October. And his room is seen on the right. It's on the lower right if you walk there, and I recommend another visit. It's now the Audubon State Historical House. Working with Mason, the first of his four artistic collaborators, Audubon initially outlined the composition, including the botanicals, and then he painted the birds, after which Mason painted plants, such as the magnificent magnolia on the left, although Audubon himself was also a talented botanical artist, and you can see that on the American goldfinch right. But it saved him time so that he could concentrate on his birds. And this is in the old master tradition. Lots of artists do it, artists like Jeff Koons, for example. But it was his position board that enabled Audubon to envisage his pre-cinematic flow based on decades of observation. He would construct it anywhere, like you see in this wonderful reconstruction of a former colleague of mine, with wood and pins, and he would score it with a grid like Albert Dürer did, because it wasn't a totally new idea, although Audubon was. He could also add to it as he found the right specimens. For example, you can see in the construction, he did the first to the couple up above, and he waited till he found the right male, which he actually painted on a separate sheet of paper, cut it out, and then he would collage it onto the final watercolor. This is really a love season tableau. It's a complex narrative, beginning with the courtship above, their billing, and below we have the outcome of the amorous activities, the nesting. You can see the one female in the nest here in the log, and the male, and you can see he's outlining, the one swooping down. Audubon is outlining where he's going to collage that particular bird. But if you look further and analyze it further, you can see the theme is really the cycle of life. Notice all the circles, eyes, the log, the swooping, and then the sycamore nuts. And then there's also death. Notice the desiccated leaves, okay, which give us the idea. This is a really profound work of the life cycle, not only of the bird, but of everything in nature. His device enabled him to represent the offspring in the exact manner I've witnessed 4 times. I don't know if you have. And the National Audubon Society circulated on the right a video in 2024, one of the best videos of an osprey catching a fish, like Audubon's weak fish. But notice that what I saw and what the National Audubon Society had in their video is from the ground. Audubon did something else. He was on the wing with the actual bird in the air. Okay, he invented videos before cameras, and you can almost hear not only the scream of the osprey in victory over the weak fish, but you can also hear the of the wings as it catch the wind. And I should say that he showed the vertical quality of the wing, which is distinct and characteristic of the species. And if you look at the wonderful foreshortening of the other wing, and then you look at those talons, they're specifically designed to fish, to catch fish. And his articulation of them is incredible. And then you see how he suggested the iridescence of the wet scales of the fish with this swash of watercolor. Always inventive. His green heron, in that he juxtaposes a wary wise parent in the foliage, it's camouflaged there, with that reckless, exposed adolescent who's going after the little moth. And notice the leaf where the red arrow points. The adult was actually painted on a separate sheet of paper and cut out. And Audubon actually cut out the leaf. He silhouetted it, he lifted it up, he put glue on the back of the adult, he put it down, and then he folded the leaf over after it. And what it does is it makes the whole scene vibrate. Makes it 3D. You know that he copied in an unedited watercolor, and I'd love to find it, a print after Trumbull's Death of Montgomery, which you see on the left, an uncolored print, I'm sure, but probably so. And no one has realized its importance. But as I would like to remind you again and again, Ecclesiastes is wrong. There are always news under the sun. This was a pivotal experience. It encouraged him to make more ambitious compositions, such as this Baroque copy of Bob White, turning 3 decibel excitement from their huddle, what they do characteristically when attacked by an inept juvenile hawk. And it's really worthy of a scene from Game of Thrones. Proving its inspiration, Audubon wrote in 1826, a year after the watercolor, that invited to dine at the Mortons' estate outside of Edinburgh, Lord Morton begs Mr. Audubon will bring a portfolio of his drawings of birds with him, and he requests to see particularly the hawks killing game and the death of General Montgomery. And do you know, that detail had escaped all scholars. Following the footsteps of George Lord, keeper of Wilson's claim to the pathological, a newly minted ornithologist has recently accused Audubon of plagiarism without understanding the artist's work or the tradition of artistic appropriation that dates from before the time of Michelangelo. As Picasso had asserted, good artists copy and great artists steal. The ornithologist has accused Audubon of copying Wilson's great horned owl. But I ask you, how many ways can you depict this majestic bird? Note all the differences. By the way, the scale is correct. The subtleties of modeling, the distinct individuals in Audubon, and the two sexes, his large female in the back with a collaged male on the front overlapping it. Notice Wilson has many species combined in this very small representation. And also notice that the two Audubon owls, their plumage is not identical, and neither one of them has plumage that looks like Wilson, nor do they proportionally look like Wilson. And notice that only Audubon has the Aristotelian unities of time, place, and action. It's one scene, and we are there with the birds. And I have a great owl story, which involves Merlin, which I'd love to tell you, and maybe you have some good the Q&A. Then when he was in England preparing his cutting from the left and engraving without access to the specimen, he remained true to that radar he mentioned before, drawn from nature. By consulting Wilson again, species, he wanted a male, he wanted a female, he only had a male. And he was in luck, since the male and female of the species look alike. He took Wilson's male, which you see down below, and he flipped it for the female. And in his ornithological biography, The Birds, he cites Wilson's plate and source for the taxonomy and for this bird. Similarly, he deemed the two fighting northern flickers at the top of the page, lacking in what he said, mirth and gaiety. And notice that it was only the two top ones because he's added a whole piece of paper at the bottom. You can see it to there. About a fifth of the paper is new. And the top two females were fighting, and it is full of mirth and gaiety. Some have got enough now because the branch is breaking. They're having a quarrel, and we know what is it. Oh. So he goes to Wilson again when he's in England in 1827, and he takes this male flicker in Wilson, and he puts it at the lower right. He looks and he says, oh, they're too much in the line. That's not good enough. So he takes the male of Wilson, and he tucks it behind the tree, and he opens its beak, and he puts in an inchworm. That's not enough. Go up the tree trunk and look at the branching of two boughs, and you see tucked in there, part of a male flicker looking at you with an eye. And what's really interesting is the ornithologist who condemned him for plagiarism in other things gives him a free pass on this, but in other instances accuses him of plagiarizing himself when he repainted in another watercolor, which all artists, or not all artists, but many artists do. It's artistic practice, and it's called self-referencing. This avian, what I like to call a pas de deux, like a ballet dance of two people, which like Buffon's chase depiction up above on the right and Audubon's later Key West quail dove, depicts the species' courting behavior of billing and regurgitating food. However, this representation of the love season, something that Audubon really just cherished, is in a different league from the other two altogether. It is as though we had stepped into a love nest to witness a couple in flagrante. It's a highly eroticized image, and it results not only from the posture with its spread tail, it's a breeding posture, and the sensuosity of its feathers, again, the pastel, you want to reach, feel it, you want to reach out and touch those feathers. But also Audubon's exposure and admiration for popular works of art co-starring the winged god Cupid and his paramour Psyche, images which were widely circulated at Prince, and they were by many, many artists. He was certainly influenced by that. In New York, Audubon dissected passenger pigeons, and we know that while in Kentucky, he had reported that these wild pigeons, that's what they were called then, darkened the skies, and the light of the noonday was obscured as by an eclipse. But when he was in New York, he dissected them, and he found rice in their guts, and he calculated the rice would have gotten the Carolinas. And he calculated by the way it had been digested that they must have flown 60 miles an hour. And what is amazing is something I just learned last year. I learned that AI and modern equipment has actually now charted the speed of the passenger pigeon at 60 miles per hour. Just what Audubon said. Amazing. Last, he also predicted that these numerous species would meet its end. We knew that the last bird died in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo. She was named Martha, and you can visit her taxidermy at the Smithsonian Institution today. And what do you think was Audubon's Carolina parakeet? He writes that a pandemonium of parakeets reminded him of a patterned carpet, an oriental carpet, which it does. This curve, and notice it's reverse curve, features at the top a female comet, unusual 14 tail feathers, and that's why because he had a whole basketful, because he wanted the most characteristic and also the most beautiful species to render, and he has it spreading its tails. In this watercolor, we get true synesthesia. We can hear the birds squawking, and boy, do they squawk. And we can hear their favorite food that he has depicted, the cockleburrows rustling. And like with the passenger pigeon, we see there's desiccated leaves. And is this a foreshortening? Because he actually commented that the numbers that he had seen in 1808 were decimated, and there were fewer and fewer Carolina parrots, as he called them, around. I wish I could show you this watercolor, because not only does he use 10 layers of watercolor and pastel and wet pastel and graphite over that, but he has thousands of strokes on every barred and ratchet of every feather of graphite, so that if I took the watercolor and tilted it to you, it would catch the light and the whole surface would sparkle, like the feathers of the birds and the ratchets would in nature when light played off of them. In 1920, the only parrot native to the U.S. was sighted for the final time. And without a recording of its calls or film footage, it really only lives in Audubon's watercolor. In 1820, Audubon had dedicated himself to his Birds of America project, but unable to find a U.S. publisher, in 1826 he sailed from New Orleans to Liverpool. These two self-portraits drawn in Liverpool reveal his intense character. The one on the right depicts him as the American woodsman on the model of Natty Bumppo, the role he created for himself to market the birds, and it is a caricature. It is amusing. Although it's humorous, this is how he dressed when, as a toast of the town in London or in Edinburgh, he's invited to 7-course dinners and asked to share turkey calls and drink far too much until 3 and 4 in the morning, only to rise several hours later at dawn to draw birds. The other suggests, in the middle, that he suffered from depression or not just sensitivity, something that comes through loud and clear in his writings. Although originally planning to find a London engraver, Audubon instead went to Edinburgh, then the intellectual capital of Britain, where he met all the major figures in the natural history scene. He was networking, just like we did. He met people like Darwin. He engaged the best engraver of the time in Edinburgh, William Home Lazars, to etch the first 10 plates of the birds. However, there was a strike by colorists, so Audubon went to London, where he located a cheaper source for his paper and copper plates, as well as finding master printmaker Robert Havell and his son Robert Havell Jr., who charged less. He knew how to save money and when there was a good deal to be made. The elder Havell soon retired. He retired after the 75th plate, and his son proved to be Audubon's ideal collaborator on the birds, an enterprise that Audubon financed without any financial support and patron, and it was by subscription. Okay, and what's really interesting for me is that Havell was ideal, Robert Havell Jr., and I always say that they're like two horses pulling a carriage. They were in perfect step. They did everything. They collaborated. They criticized each other. They exchanged ideas, and they came up with an incredible product. Just to explain very briefly a complicated process that, again, we could spend hours on, with the house wren, you can see the watercolor on the left. It looks very Norman Rockwell-y. It's so realistic. And again, you could touch that felt hat. Notice the guano is blue. The male wren perching on the hat was actually one that entered Audubon's studio, and he painted from life. Then that would be reversed on a copper plate. The one in the middle has been coated with nickel so that you can see the image better. And then that would be run through the press with wet paper, and you would get the impression on the right, but you have to remove the color, the browns and the blues, because you would get the print all in values from white to black, all shades of gray, that then the colorists would hand color. Now, Audubon organized his magnum opus not in the traditional manner by taxonomy or phylogenetic order, because think of 25 sparrows, 40 gulls, 20 ducks. It would be boring, okay? But according to his aesthetic judgment and which watercolors were ready for engraving. And he believed that this order resembled nature, how you saw things in nature. And arguably, it was more interested for his subscribers who received their prints in fascicles, that is, groups of 5, okay? Usually 1 large, 1 medium, and 3 small. So there was something for everybody. Everybody was always surprised. And this allowed for the outliers, the species that were certain to be allowed to finish things when he could. Remember, this was not a book. It was a folio edition, and subscribers could either bind them or not. So let's return to the artist's influence of Audubon. As a student of art, he appreciated Van Dyck's achievement with his connecting scientific exactitude with narrative. And by the way, Van Dyck was at butterfly scales paintings. Thereby, we segue from illustration of natural birds, natural history, to a work of art. Although the interaction with Audubon's words always reflect species behaviors that he had observed. The northern mockingbird on the right is among his most Audubon based the rattlesnake on a drawing he made in Oakland. He said, "Oh, well, rattlesnakes don't climb trees. Oh, rattlesnakes don't have curved teeth." But in 1824, John Knox published an article that rattlesnakes do have decurved fangs, and in the issue of National Wildlife, one of the winning photos in the 2022 issue showed a rattlesnake climbing a tree and injecting a jay hole. So Audubon is vindicated. In London, Audubon attempted without success to paint well and admire Thomas Lawrence and his Broadmoor portraits. The two became friends and exchanged visits, which Audubon describes as fascinating. During one, Audubon probably saw him shooting on the right and was struck by how much resemblance of reference. They never became adept in oil painting. The study of Lawrence's paintings brought in things that he adapted to his increasingly complex tableaus and his mastery of watercolors, how to paint in layers. Lawrence had been influenced by Anthony Van Dyck, another artist who would have admired. In the very light, the woodpecker reminded him that Dyck had saw that the Harveyville woodpecker, he'd say, "It goes a Van Dyck." Well, as you all know, the jury is still out of space. It's probably it is probable that it's 25. Hey! been silenced forever, although you can see it in a 3-minute black and white film from the 1930s. It also lives only about in the movie. And notice on the right, his subtle modeling lines, there are not in graphite or in black chalk. They are in stylus action on the talk about subtlety. Audubon had another characteristic that not many people have. He was eidetic. That is, he had more than a photographic memory. With his observations, he was able to record like primitive people and store his images in motion. It was like video, and he had that ability, and he, shall we say, kept encouraging it to grow. This is an example, and it's kind of a sad one, of the yellow-breasted chat. Our friend is back again. He was criticized for the very sort of balletic pose of the butterfly pose of that one male at the top left. And people said, that doesn't happen in nature. The other two males were fine. Notice that there's a nesting scene below. And Havell even got after him for that. And finally, Audubon caved. And you can notice on the right, in the Havell plate, there is no male in that wonderful butterfly pose. But guess what? Photography has vindicated him. It's exactly what the yellow-breasted chat does. And on the left is Audubon's finest oil painting, in my opinion. And it underlines what he learned from the French Three was his kindred spirit. Similarly, one sees in this comparison how each artist studied his model from life. Though birds are striding forward, only Audubon's is filled with physical and psychological tension. Notice that Audubon's bird has seen us. It's also seen the hunter at the lower right below the plantation. And its back foot is coiling up like a spring-up clock. And in a minute, it's going to walk off the page. Both of these theatrical scenes have similar prop settings. Audubon's drama features a pair-bonded couple defending their union against the interloper at the left. And note their parallel postures. It reinforces their partnership. Very psychological and compositional. No doubt Baudry's unprecedented image was a suggestion for Audubon's composition. This is a hunting drone from France on the left, there were many. For subtlety, Audubon turned the stag's head on its side, and he eliminated its antlers because they would detract from the carrion-loving vultures, which, in a kind of repulsive pose, embrace the head. In England, Audubon was also exposed to Anglo-Chinese water. Is in the March of the Birds left. She was a subscriber to the Birds, but she didn't like the Chinese wallpaper that was given to her by the future George IV. She was his mistress. So she cut out 28 birds from 10 plates and collaged them where she felt the hand-painted wallpaper was lacking. Notice our flickers are back again. Another Asian stimulus were the life-size birds on Wheaton by Indian artists commissioned by Sir Elijah auctioned and in public in definitive proof that he knew them is found in the copy of the Greater Adjutant Stork on the White. Came to the New York Historical Society when I was it came to my attention when I was there. It came to the Historical Society with the watercolor models for the Birds of America. It came with the nation of Lucy Bakewell Audubon. So it was in Audubon's possession. So we know he knew about the impy birds. And needless to say, after I found the real impy bird on the left, I changed the attribution from Audubon artist after the Muslim artists that the MPs had employed. Now for the moment, I think we've all been in it. This is the one people have pointed that it's a model evil. And notice that self-taught. It was not truism, although he probably is a lie. He was indeed because Audubon studied him in prints, and probably the painting on the right, he probably saw that in Bordentown, Pennsylvania. And he used that particular painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps as the basis for his Golden Eagle. Notice the self-portrait on the lower right. It has the mate to the eagle that has the hair in its talons over his back as he climbs over the precipice. So the eagle with the hair will go back to the nest, and there'll be no nest and no mate guarding it. However, things are not that simple. We could probably spend 2 hours on this watercolor. He also knew Rembrandt's abduction of Ganymede through the print, and he has also harnessed that. Now, we know that he carried La Fontaine's fables with him wherever he went. Quotes from him frequently. And during COVID lockdown, I reread all the fables of La Fontaine and identified passages that inspired several of Audubon's watercolors, including the Golden Eagle. And its hair being borne off by the eagle's nest relies on the fable of the eagle and the dung beetle. And that's where he got the rabbit or the hare. So just as Audubon's eagle will go back to the nest with the hare, and there is no other eagle there, no mate, you can see that or if you read, shall we say, the fables of La Fontaine, when his eagle goes back with the rabbit, all the eggs are destroyed as well. In 1828, after naturalist William Swainson and his wife rescued Audubon from a bout of depression, the trio decamped. On arrival, Swainson went to study at the Jardin des Plantes, where Audubon went to the Louvre. He wanted art. He visited it many times during his sojourn. And among the artists he met in Paris was a botanical artist we nicknamed the Hill of the Flowers. And Roberta and Audubon exchanged several visits, and neither one of them could afford the other person's ambitious projects. They combined hundreds of plates. Lucy, of course, was delighted with flowers. And you can see that Audubon appreciated Roberta's flowers, but how different his roses are from Roberta's. His are moving and in different stages, again, the life cycle of the rose. Let's pause and compare mature work with early work executed in Henderson. So I want to take it back to Henderson. It was such a seminal period. We could see that when he began in Henderson, he was using pastel and graphite as multimedia. He had 2 species, not like one that he later wanted with Aristotelian unities of time, place, and action. And we see that he doesn't have a complex composition here or a narrative or action poses. Therefore, it's not surprised that this did not make it into the portraits of America as the preparatory models. To help viewers empathize with the mortally tinted great black-backed gull on the right, Audubon based his composition on a religious scene, the deposition of Christ, and I think he saw a print of Rubens' descent from the cross. He also saw either a print and most likely the painting of David's Death of Law, which influenced him in the negative space. You can see that David was also influenced by Pietas and perhaps Rubens' deposition. And what happens with these allusions to tragic deaths? Audubon's depiction begins to ooze gravitas, have a great deal of resonance. Despite his lack of dates specific, Audubon was a perfectionist. He realized that perfection is impossible to attain. Look at this progression. His early great he has a characteristic, very unique trait of being able to turn the vertebra of the neck, and he has the bird preening its aigrettes, okay? But he has looked at Buffon on the left. He knows that if you have a white bird on white paper, you can't see it. So what does he do? He puts it against the dark. But then he realized, there's not much natural history in here. So 9 years later, he does the watercolor on the right. He keeps that turning vertebra, but he puts it in a naturalistic setting with the mud chimneys, the bird's favorite food, the crayfish. But he doesn't ever finish this watercolor. He doesn't like it. He does a third version that you see here on the right. And notice that he puts the chimney in front of the bird. And then what he does, look at this. He doesn't like the head, so look closely on the left. He does a separate head on a sheet of paper and collages it on. Oh, my goodness. We know that presciently in the 1830s, Audubon worried about the plume hunters decimating the species while nesting in colonies. And we know that the great egrets and other species were saved from extinction by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. But again, this is another story told in the book. And we know that hats with feathers became very fashionable in the late 19th century. Most sought after were the seasonal breeding plumes or aigrettes, which you see of the great egrets that Audubon executed so beautifully. They were more expensive per ounce than gold. They were the chief victims of the plume hunters. And in 1902, about 1.5 tons of great egret plumes were sold in London alone. And that quantity required, people have calculated, 200,000 dead adult birds, which meant probably 2 or 3 times the same amount of dead, either canceled eggs or dead small baby birds. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act also put a stop to hummingbird earrings on the left, or hats with parakeet birds, like we see then. Finally, let's turn for a brief moment to Audubon's legacy. I want to show you, because I know we're running out of time and we want questions. And we're going to look at Walton Ford, Dying Words, the Carolina Parakeet. Notice how Walton Ford used a death scene, General Wolfe, not Montgomery, and Audubon for his literal translation of this wonderful print. Another example is Winslow-Homer's model painting, which Audubon's placed over a gun barrel. There are hunters. Tellingly, like Audubon, Lawrence, and Redrawn, Homer was self-taught. He was a brilliant watercolorist. But only Audubon describes the actual species feathers. Notice that the female is breaking. She's not wounded. The male is wounded on his left wing, is plummeting to the ground. Interestingly, Homer reverses that. Finally, there's the Audubon mural project, which was inspired by Audubon. And how many of you have heard about this on the Upper West Side of Manhattan? It commissions artists with diverse styles to paint murals of birds in peril of climate change. And to date, 166 species on different buildings, and the embellishment of 19 types. But the project has now spread across the United States and also to France. The book's final chapter examines Audubon's role as a proto-conservationist, and I hope you'll read this. And a part of that was his desire to found a national museum of natural history. He wrote to his friend Daniel Webster in 1841, and this is 28 years before the founding of the American Museum of Natural History. And he wanted to do it not for power, he wanted to do it because of his mission for saving wildlife. And we all know that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology claims that since 1970, over 3 billion birds have been lost. That is 1 in 4 birds in North America. But there is hope, and there are stories like the bald eagle and the rebound from DDT poisoning, and also the bird glass that's been invented. For example, at the Javits Center, they replaced all of the fluorescein glass, and they reduced by 90% the number of birds killed by the bird impacts. Because Audubon's pre-cinematic images have the potential of movement, his birds are alive and seem to be about to fly off the page. Just think of the vision it took, just like Leonardo to paint the smile on the Mona Lisa. She's always changing. Before anyone dreamed of moving pictures, let alone video. He invented it before it existed. And to paint the Carolina parakeet in a tenor stance, so that you can almost hear its distinctive call, the one to the mate down below. You can see the flowers pulsating, and we want to touch it. It lives and breathes, unlike birds in field guides. It's Audubon who turned me onto birds and made me a bird watcher and initiated me into the magic of bird watching, because through his study, he compressed whole lifetimes and attitudes of species in one image that really go beyond video. It's pure magic. And what makes Audubon's images so compelling is, like all great art, you can return to them over and over again. Well, I guess I'm getting the high sign to get off, too. It's enough honking and chirping and crowing and whatever we do. And I hope that we have just begun to touch the surface of Audubon's artistic journey and his passionate study of nature and his hard work. Passionate study and hard work are what pay off in life. And his images of birds still sing about the beauty of nature. And I want to turn in the Q&A to whether Audubon was more of a naturalist or an artist, and I look forward to hearing from you and also hearing your stories about birds. I went over a little bit, but we started late. Okay. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Olson. For those of you that have questions, feel free to go ahead and put those into the Q&A. I do apologize. I know that we had some choppy audio at different times,
Sorry.
but I think that we got through it, and we were able to have a great presentation. Really appreciate this. I'll go ahead and kick us off for a question while we're waiting to see if anyone has any that they want to drop. So one thing that's really interesting for me, if you might call me such a general historian, I really appreciate with this book your perspective as an art historian. There's so much there that in the narrative I knew, but then getting really into the details of the art that I had missed and talking about how Audubon looked up to some of these old masters and everything. So would you mind elaborating a little bit on your approach to this? Because it is a little bit different than most authors that talk about Audubon.
And that's why I wanted to do it, because it had never been done. And it was actually cumulative. It was one of those things, you have files in your office and or at home, there are things you have to-do lists. And I had a big file saying, oh, what was Audubon looking at? What, sparked his interest? And then I began reading what he wrote, and he talked about so many of these people. And notice, and he has comments on many of these artists. If you read his journals, and unfortunately we only have 3 of the 50 or so that he probably wrote. But it's trying to unpack it. And you have to know art, but you also have to know the man. What was he seeing? And you had to know what museums he was seeing, what exhibitions he was seeing. And he also, remember, knew and sought out contemporary artists. I mean, he talks about Taschen. He talks about Rembrandt. He talks about all these artists all the time. And so I began looking at the artists he talked about, and lo and behold, I began seeing beneath the surface. And it's like one of those things where, you can see something from the side, but you can't quite focus on it. But if you look at it long enough, it becomes very apparent. And then you can look at it directly and unpack it. So it took me a very long time. It took me 25 years of keeping these files. And then I went further. I dug and I dug and I dug. And this is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more. And any book is that way. It's always sins of omission, okay? Those things that haunt us. So for me, it was like Audubon's Birds of America. It was a labor of love. I really tried to see things through his eyes. And that's, I think, a good historian tries to take themselves back into the era of the subject. What would they have been exposed to? Ken Burns does this in his series on the American Revolution. What was happening? And so I didn't just look at the art. I also looked at what plays he went to, what music he talks about, what authors he read. And how we'd like to have an inventory. I know there's a wonderful inventory in the Audubon Museum in Henderson, but I would like to have the inventory of the 150 books. We know he had Wilson and a few other ornithological treatises, but I would love to know more. And that's why, studying Cincinnati, I actually went, there is no catalog of the Cincinnati College library, or the Western Museum, but other libraries that were open to the public, there are catalogs. And I know that he was able to see Wilson there. He saw other people, Buffon. He saw Rees' Encyclopedia. And so you really have to look at the entire culture. Does that begin to answer your question? I mean, and in a way, it's an exploration, and it parallels what Audubon did in exploring America for birds, and also he was interested in animals and plants and botany and everything. It paralleled what he was doing, exploring the culture, exploring the times, the people he met. What were the influences? For instance, Sir Walter Scott was one of his great heroes, and he made sure he met him, and the two exchanged ideas and had correspondence. It's always just fascinating to take the time to go backwards and bring it forward. Okay, did that answer your question?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can I say something? No one's wanting to talk about whether he was more of an artist than a naturalist.
Well, and you know what? So I will say this. I just got another email. So the chat is turned off for this meeting, but you can still submit questions right next to it on that Q&A dialogue box. So you can click on that if you want to answer that question, whether you think he was more of an artist or a naturalist, or if you do have any other questions. Luckily, I've had some people reach out personally to me right here through email. Another one, and I think this one's really interesting. So you did mention this earlier, and people familiar with your work know that you actually had some experience tracking down records relating to Audubon's birth in Haiti. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's had to have been really interesting to get into.
This is really fascinating because there were no records of births in either France or any of the colonial outposts of France until 1792, and he was born in 1785. They didn't get their act together to keep archives. So the only place you could find records were in local churches, okay? And so that's where you had to find them. However, because Audubon was illegitimate, okay, there were no records in a church of his birth because he had not been baptized. It's in baptismal records. They don't record the births per se. And the same thing for his half-sister, Rose Muguet. She also was not baptized until they were baptized later when they were in France. And so there is no record of her birth, either one of them, except in bills presented by the doctors that delivered them. And there is the bill of Dr. Sanson, who delivered Audubon at his father's plantation. So it's really, really, really interesting. But I did deal with the Haitian archives. And of course, that's in a very sad state because the country today is in great upheaval. As we know, it's a lawless place. But there are dedicated Haitians who keep up. And if you want to subscribe, I subscribed for 3 years, you can belong. And as they begin to go through their own records and put them online, you can search different parishes, different towns, and find the different parish records of people. It's a fascinating thing. And they have, I've noticed recently, the man who was the keeper and in charge of it passed away, unfortunately, 2 years ago. There's someone new. And they've gone really great with a wonderful website that's very sort of state-of-the-art. And so there is great hope if they could ever sort of get their act together. If you're looking ever for French records after 1792, a great place is in the French archives now. And the ones that I went to for Audubon's movements between Haiti and France were in Nantes, and they were put online. But if you ever want any of them from all the cities of France, you can go to the Mormons in Utah. They have in their archive, because they have adopted, I guess, everybody, you and I are probably there too, every single document that they can about people's births worldwide. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And I actually corresponded with them because I got desperate at one point. But it was during COVID. And they said, as soon as COVID lifts, okay, we'd love to have you come. So my story with Audubon is also a positive story about COVID. And like him, it was making lemonade out of lemons. You're given something and you find a project and you go for it and you make it into something.
No, that's great. And it's funny that you mentioned that there at the end with the LDS Church and everything, because a lot of their records are on Family Search. And, Family Search is kind of like the Wikipedia of genealogy. So you got to be careful on there. But they've got so many records. I mean, even going back from the 60s and 70s that were then put on microfilm. And I don't know if anyone's ever worked with microfilm. It's a lot of fun. But
oh no. And microfiche is even worse.
Oh, yeah. But they have all kinds of stuff. And actually, on a related topic here, whenever I started here, obviously at that point, so this Friday is 2 years that I've been the curator here.
Really?
But whenever I came here,
Congratulations. Great.
So whenever I started here, obviously we did have a lot of questions about slavery. And so I was looking through these books, and they kept saying 9 enslaved workers. And I'd look back, and this book would refer to that book, which would refer to that book, and finally I realized it was the Henderson County deed records. And I looked, and on Family Search, I was able to find the deed records that actually list the names and ages of the enslaved workers in 1819. And
now that's great.
yeah, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that those have been published anywhere. And so they are in our museum on an exhibit. But yeah, I mean, just
Can
talking
you share an image? I'd like to see it. It sounds great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure to send that to you.
That's great. So what are your plans?
My plans?
Yeah.
Well, nothing right now.
I meant for the museum. Are you going to do more exhibitions? I know you have a lot of nature walks and things like that.
Yeah. So we do a guided hike each month. Pardon me. And in our lobby, as soon as you walk into the museum, we kind of have these mini exhibits that are offered for free every day. So I actually just put one up. We're actually got permission from Harvard University's Houghton Library to display the early drawings that relate to Kentucky. So we have 29 images up in our lobby that are reproduced from those in the Harvard Library. Some are from, probably about half of them are from Henderson. By the way, those of you listening, be sure to stop by and check this out. Half of them are from Henderson. What's really interesting is Audubon came here to Henderson in 1810. And that was a very important year for Henderson because it became officially incorporated, changed its name from Red Banks to Henderson. So in 1810, Audubon wrote on 4 drawings Red Banks.
Red Banks. He did.
And started in 1811 writing Henderson. So you get
in my book, you notice I put Red Banks in
that's
parents.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you get to see that, and of course from the Falls of the Ohio and Louisville as well. So we do little stuff like that. We're going to have some buckskin clothing actually that we received from the family. That's going to be going on display probably in the next couple of months.
And that's new.
Yes, that just came in this past year.
Oh, how great! Is it beaded?
Yeah.
Is it beaded?
Sorry?
Beaded buckskin?
Beaded? No, it's not beaded.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Great.
I just want to get to another question real quick because this one was really good, and I have something to show to answer this question. Dan asked, are his original watercolors from the New York Historical Society available in book form to view all of the paintings? And I would just like to plug this book, Audubon's Aviary by Dr. Roberta Olson, who has the original watercolor. Oh, and look, I didn't even do that on purpose. It's the same on the screen.
Leave nothing to chance, right?
That's right. And by the way, if you're looking for this book, you can buy it in our gift shop. So,
Okay. Thank you.
to answer that question, yes.
Great.
Marilyn said, fabulous presentation. Thank you for the program. If you have any other questions, now's your time to get it in before we end this.
And if you have any other questions, they can send them to you and you can pass them on to me. How's that?
There we go. That's true.
Yeah. Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Let's see. So Dinah Campbell emailed me. She said, I think he was a naturalist and with a stupendous drive and talent.
To
answer your question.
He thinks he's a naturalist. Okay. I think he's many things, including a naturalist and an artist. But the thing is about natural history, to my mind, it's always changing. It's like all science. It's outdated, like all of Audubon's taxonomy. He's forever annotating his watercolors as the taxonomy changed. And he started that out with the Havell prints. He would have Havell burnish out and change the name when the species changed. And we know now that many species are changing with DNA results. And the birds, for instance, are no longer together with this is happening with the flickers, it's happening with many birds, that they're in totally different families than they were before. And the species are being separated and it goes back and forth and back and forth. So my feeling is that he had both in him. But for me, the natural history is in his representations, not necessarily in either the text of the ornithological biography, which makes great reading, by the way, but it is in the art, which includes the natural history, because it is like fine wine. It gets better with age. It is not outdated, whereas natural history, as in all sciences, you always have new discoveries that overturn past ones. But that is not to diminish his contribution to natural history, and how nature at the time, at the moment when he was drawing it, is enshrined forever in his works. I hope that doesn't contradict what one of the people said. Okay.
No. Real quick, because we're getting to 7:28, and I want to be respectful of your time. Keith asked, any recommendations for a non-author with an interest in a historical and current subject, mine being the Clean Water Act, and how to present a dry subject to create interest in people without much background knowledge of the subject, the goal being to remind people of the importance of history?
About clean water, I'm not quite getting what he would like of me, but the whole movement, the movement for clean water?
I think he's saying he's doing some research right now on the Clean Water Act and how to present it in an interesting way that's engaging.
Okay. My feeling is that we are now such a visual culture. I mean, we're saturated with visual images. We're, on our phones all day long. I'm not, but many people are. But I'm very visual. So he has to find things that are riveting, okay, visually, to carry his argument, because then he can get, and I don't know what he's thinking of. A book, is he? A book?
He said non-author, so I don't know if he's writing on it. And Keith, if you want to jump onto that question and add more.
Or if it's a video, or if it's a blog. I think sometimes if you can get both words and images together, you widen your audience and you get things that will stick in people's mind. Words tend not to stick as much as images, okay? So even if they're people that are stepping up to the plate and arguing for clean water, or sites that need cleaning up, or if you're talking about saving salmon in the dams that have been blown up, you have to see the dams and you have to see them being blown up, and you have to see the salmon going up the stream, whether it's a moving image or a frozen image. It sinks it makes it real to people, because we're multisensory. Does that answer your question? And again, it would depend so much on the media that you're going to be using and what platform you want to present your ideas. Maybe you should think of multi-platforms and play around with multi-platforms, because you probably find different solutions.
So Keith said book or public presentations. I would add to that too. It's interesting. I've been lucky enough to be able to talk about a lot of subjects, whether it be Audubon, whether it be early Middle Bronze Age Jericho, whether it be Titanic. And one thing is that, I've been all over. But I will say too, especially with presentations, even if it's not a particularly exciting topic to a lot of people, if you show that you're passionate about history, it automatically engages the audience that's right there.
It does.
So that's what I would say, especially for public presentations.
Yeah. And the writing can reflect that too. I mean, I think that the writing has to reflect excitement. And if you have the writing and the speech and the images, we'll stay away from music. How is that? Okay. But that's also something. People use music to express things too. It depends. You can use all sorts of things in this day and age. Anyway, I wish you good luck on clean water. It's a great cause. If you want to share anything with me via Connor, I'd be happy to comment in more detail if I knew more about what you're dreaming about and envisioning.
All righty. Well, I think we are hitting the end of our time. Keith did say one last thing. Yes, I did not think about the importance of visual aids, so that's a very good point.
Great.
Now, I will say, if you guys have any other questions that you'd like for Dr. Olson or for me, relating to the museum, anything like that, you can always shoot me an email at Connor, CONNOR, Humphrey, HUMPHREY @ky.gov, and I will do my best to be able to answer your questions or direct them to Dr. Olson. So Dr. Olson, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and Happy New Year, too. Happy New Year.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful to be part of your flock. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.